Hello everybody and welcome back to Combe Valley Campers. Today we're going to be showing you how to fit a swivel base for a double seat in a T5 or T6 van. As you would have seen in one of our previous videos, we have fitted one of the crash-tested Rusty Lee swivel bases for a single seat in a T5 or T6. Today we're going to be showing you the double base, and in this van in particular we've got a really nice Sportline trimmed double seat that we're going to be showing to you. There's going to be a slight difference as well in that we have got to remove some of the remnants of the bulkhead that are in the floor. So we will go over that just quickly, but for the main part we're going to be showing you how to fit your double swivel base. There are lots of different suppliers out there and manufacturers who will supply you a swivel base for a double seat for your T5, T6. Now the only ones I would approve to you are ones that have been crash tested. Now the Rusty Lee ones in particular have been crash tested to a high standard in Germany in a T5 shell, and they've actually been TUV approved. Now this is an M1 crash test and it's a TUV approved, which means Rusty Lee as a company can actually sell them to European market. There's not many other seat bases out there that are eligible to do that because they don't have the same standards of crash test, which is why we go for this. It's made in Great Britain, it's distributed from Great Britain, and it's all made in-house by the guys at Rusty Lee Rock and Roll Beds. We fitted their swivel base, it's had a great response so far. They're all available, including this base, they're all available from combevalleycampers.co.uk. Check a link in the bottom, look at our products page, and you'll be able to buy this seat base directly from us. The tools you are going to need to fit the Rusty Lee seat base are as follows. A ratchet with a 17mm socket and a 15mm socket. Some cable ties and side cutters. A pair of flathead screwdrivers, a T30 security Torx bit, which means it has the hole in the end of the Torx bit, and a T25 Torx bit. You will also need a 22mm spanner and a hacksaw with a metal blade. If you need to remove the bottom lip of the bulkhead, which is what we have to do today, you're going to need the following tools. A grinder with a 1mm cutting disc and an 80 grit flap disc, a metal file, a ruler, a hammer and metal chisel, a set of mole grips and or large pliers, a M10 splined bit, a 10mm deep socket, and a dustpan brush and a wire brush just to clean up the areas you're going to need to cut away. Let's get on with it. We're very fortunate in a T5 and T6 that all the fixings you need to access are pretty easy. First step for removing the seat is to lift the seat base. So you grab your hand under the front of the seat base, lift that up, slide the base forward and lift. And in here you have access to all 8 bolts, and that's where you need your 17mm socket. And what we're going to do now is remove all 8 and remove the seat rearwards into the back of the van. Now you can bring it out the sliding door as well, but for what we're doing it's going to be easier for me to just lift this out and slide it in the back of the van. I've loosened off 7 and the 8th nut is hiding here under this plastic. Now this covers up some of the electrical connectors and one of the fuses, if I remember rightly. This might differ for some of the newer T6s, but the T5s in particular have just some connections under here and one fuse. And the plastic trim's very easy to undo. You literally get your thumb in under here and pop it out. All it's using is these two clips here to attach onto those two prongs, and it just pulls away. And it's the same for this side. There's another trim this side, and that just comes off, and that will enable you to access the 8th nut down there. And then a little bit later on, we're going to talk to you about removing all of these electrics. As a handy hint, just keep all your nuts in one place. Either pop them in the top of the dash there, or in the little cubby hole under the air vent. All the nuts have been undone and removed. Before we remove the seat entirely, we've got to remove the electrical connectors, as we pointed out before. Now, normally they're just a Torx bit. On this van in particular, they're Torx bit with the security feature in them, which is, they've got like a little dimple in the middle. And what you want is a T30 Torx bit, such as this one here, and that's got a little hole in the center, and that will undo. Now there is one screw here, and there is one screw at the bottom. Get them undone and the whole bracket will come out. The seats are pretty heavy to remove. I've got a method that I use. You might find yourself another way. I would first of all advise you to do this with two people, but if it is just you, move it in little bits. Don't try and pick it up and manhandle it to the other side of the garage. Literally pick it up, move it an inch, pick it up, move it an inch. It's a heavy thing. What I've found is to grab it by the seat belt here, because it's sort of the middle part of the seat, and you can actually lift it. I'd normally be where you're stood now. I'd be there, and I'd be lifting the seat backwards, but as I'm doing it from here, I'll show you from here. Grab the seat belt here, lift it, and move it back. Only little bits at a time, because you've got to check your wiring isn't catching under here. So now you've moved it a little bit, make sure your wire's not catching anywhere, and then we can bring the seat backwards. Before you go any further, make just a quick assessment of what you've got, because depending on the spec of the van, so it might be a caravel or a delivery van or whatever it may be, your wiring might be different under here. You might have lots, you might have none, you might have all sorts. You may have even had heated seats or something. So all the wiring under here is going to be different. Take stock, you might find some loose change, nice bit of cash for you, but get it cleaned up, assess what you've got, and then we'll move forward to the next stage. Next phase for us is to remove the bottom lip of the old bulkhead. Now, if you don't have that bit, or you don't want to know how to remove it, skip forward to this time. Ali's going to make sure that goes down in the bottom screen there. Skip to that time and you can continue to watch the installation of the swivel seat base. If you want to see how this is removed, keep watching and we'll go and do it now. Removing this lip then, we are going to remove this step. That just pulls out. I'm going to peel the mat back as far as possible, and then we're going to clean up under here, make an assessment as to how far we're going to remove the lip, because the owner is not too bothered if we just remove it up until here, or if we want to do the whole job in its entirety, we may have to remove this seat and everything else. So I'm going to remove this step, remove the mat, have a bit of an assessment and go from there. First point is to remove the passenger seat belt. You will need an M10 spline bit for that. Just slots in the bolt there. We'll remove that, remove the seat belt out of the way, remove this plastic trim, remove the step, remove the rubber cab mat. I've made the decision. I'm going to remove the entire lip that once held in the bulkhead. So for that, I'm now going to remove the driver's seat, which in turn means I'm doing the handbrake. and then we can lift the whole mat out of the way, clean under there, expose the welds that we've got to grind out, remove the lip, and yeah, it'll be a clean finish. We'll clean the mat, and when you put the spinning seat base on it, it'll be a really nice clean finish. To remove the driver's seat, you've got to remove this nut off the handbrake cable. Now, a good tip is just to measure how much of that thread is exposed, because when you put the handbrake cable back on, you don't want to be having it too tight so you can't move the wheels, or you don't want to have it too loose so your handbrake cable doesn't work. So in this instance, our handbrake cable is 12 millimeters. There is 12 millimeters worth of thread exposed above that nut, so I can now safely remove that, knowing that we're going to get it bang on when we put the nut back on again. Before removing any part of the handbrake or the braking system, make sure your vehicle is safely chocked or in gear. If you are on anything other than a flat surface, you are going to want to chock the wheels and also put the vehicle in gear. We are on a completely flat surface in the workshop, but we're still going to chock the wheels, pop the car into either reverse or fifth gear, and yeah, then we can safely remove that handbrake. To remove the driver's seat, there are 4 17mm nuts under there. Again, using our 17mm socket, just undo the 4 nuts. We're going to lift the seat off the studs, and then we're just going to slide the seat forward. There's not a lot of room in here, plus we don't need to get to the whole floor, so we're just going to slide it forward. If we find we need more room, then yes, we'll take the seat out. But be wary that you're going to have some plugs underneath potentially if you've got an airbag, or you've got heated seats, or even the seatbelt pretensioners on later vehicles. Once you've unplugged the connectors, make sure you do not turn the ignition on the vehicle before plugging them back in, otherwise you will bring up an airbag light on the dash, and if you don't have the right computer, that might cost you 30 quid at your local garage to get that airbag light wiped off. The system will still work, it's just that your airbag light will remain on the dashboard. We've got the passenger seat out, driver's seat out. We've lifted the mat and we've cleaned up all of that edge to expose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inch long bead welds. And to cut them out, we're going to be using a 1mm cutting disc on a grinder. Now, for the purposes of the video, we're going to be using the guard on it as well, because you've got to keep safe. I'm going to be using some welding mitts, a mask, and some ear defenders as well. Make sure you wear your PPE. And so we're going to grind out those spot welds. Once we've ground out those welds as much as we can, we're going to use a set of mole grips to try and flex the metal and break the remaining part of the spot weld. If we can't do that, we're going to be using a chisel and a hammer just to break the last bits of the weld, and then with luck the whole piece should all come out in one bit. It's a bit more difficult for us because we've obviously got flooring in place, we've had to remove the seats and everything else. So we're trying to remove this without damaging anything. Ideally, this action, but it should be one of the first things you do when converting your van into a camper, is removing all of the bulkhead bit. But for the purposes of this video, this is how we're going to do it. Before we make any of the, before we remove any of those welds, we're going to remove the seat bolts. It's just a case of using a 22mm spanner or a 22mm deep socket on those. Remove them, and then you can get a better angle to access those welds and grind them out. That's a lot easier to do in an empty van, that's for sure. We're going to dress that up now with a little belt sander, put a little bit of paint on it, and then call it done. So we're left with some rough edges, just where we took out that bulkhead divider. So I'm going to use this flap disc. This is a 80 grit. Yeah, it's an 80 grit flap disc. So take off your cutting disc, put your flap disc on. Always make sure your grinder is unplugged when you're changing discs, which mine is. And yeah, so I'm going to put my gear back on, just flatten them down, and then I'm going to be using a bit of red oxide primer paint just to cover up any bare metal. Now we've removed the bulkhead divider, we're now going to continue with the prep for the seat base. First thing we've got to do is hide these cables. These are the cables we removed from under the seat, and what we've got to do is remove this piece of black plastic. And to do that, we're going to unplug each of the plugs, remove them from this framework, clip them back together, and then lay them in this trench, so to speak. And then we're just going to cable tie them to the existing wires, keep them all neat so they don't move anywhere, they're not rubbing on anything. Lay the mat down, and then we can put our base back on. So I brought you down here to show you these 4 studs that hold your seat base in originally, and that are going to be holding your Rusty Lee seat base in now. If you were to put this seat base straight onto these, the front 4, the rear 4 are fine, it's just the front 4 will catch the seat base as it does its spin and its movement. So what we've got to do is remove the top of this bolt, just the unthreaded part, so it's not going to affect the bolt at all, it's just a little bit too high. And we're going to show you 3 methods of how to do that, because you might have different tools to me, you might not have access to a vise, for example. So what we're going to do is show you 3 ways to remove the tops of these studs or bolts here. The first method is going to be using a hacksaw with the stud in situ. Second method, we're going to remove the stud, put it in a vise, and use the hacksaw. Third method is we're going to use a grinder with a cutting disc or flap disc, either or, and we're going to just shave the top of the bolt off in situ. But before you do any of those 3 methods, stick one of your seat base nuts on the thread. And that is because if you, for any reason, mess up the thread whilst you're cutting it or grinding it or whatever it may be, you will recut any damaged thread as you remove this nut off the stud. So put them all on there. That one's being stiff. Put them all on there. Trim the tops off. And then when you unwind them, you will clean up any damaged thread that you may have caused whilst you've been trimming them down. So first situation then, we're going to use the hacksaw, and we're literally going to be putting the blade there on the top of the thread. Second method then is to remove the whole stud, and for that I'm using a 22mm spanner, or you can use a 22mm deep socket. Wind it out, and we'll take that over to the vise. What I'm going to use with this method, now the stud is in the vise, I've wound that nut right out to the point at which I want to put the saw. So the nut is almost my stop. So I'm not going to get any further up the threads or damage any of the threads. Trim the end off that one, and just had a little bit of a burr on the end. I'm literally just cleaning off the sharp area, only very lightly, but with a metal file. Pop that back in. Unwind the nut, and it'll clean up any of that thread that may have been damaged. For the last two, I'm going to show you a further two methods. We're going to use the grinder. One is going to have a 1mm cutting disc on, and then we're going to do the other with an 80 grit flap disc. And as before, I'm going to wind the nut up to the point at which I want the cut to finish. I can then use the top of that nut just as a stopper almost, so I don't go and damage any of the thread. So I'm going to put on my PPE now and go and get my grinder. As a pre-warning, this is going to get messy because we're not cutting off the end of that bolt. We're going to be grinding it all away, so there's going to be a lot of swarf and metal. So you may choose not to use this method. I'm just showing it to you because it's one of the methods you could use. So 80 grit flap disc, that bolt, top off. Last but not least, 1mm cutting disc on the grinder. Again, it's going to make a bit of a mess, so make sure anything you don't want damaged is covered. Use the nut again, wound it right up, so we're just exposing the bit we want to cut off. Now I haven't touched that yet because it's going to be red hot, but once that's cooled down, we'll just take that little bit off, and then that'll be that one trimmed. So thanks for your patience so far. I know it's only 8 bolts to take it off and then 8 bolts to put it back on, but it's the preparation, and the preparation is key. So everything's done now. The cables are tucked away and tidied, the bolts are trimmed down, the floor's clean, even the bulkhead divider bit is out, and now we've got to put the base on. It only fits on one way, and if you look at the end, that'll be the easiest way to tell. The shallow box section goes to the front. The deeper box section goes to the rear. And I mean, you could try and fit it the other way around, but none of the bolts would line up. So shallow to the front, deeper to the rear. It's heavy, so if you're not very strong, you might want somebody else to help you. And here's where you can see trimming those bolts down matters, because that bolt stud even is now lower than that white sheet of nylon, so this black top half is not going to catch anywhere on it. So we'll now just put the 8 bolts back in, taking note this little window in the box section here is put in there purely so you can put that nut in. There's no way you'd get that on otherwise. So undo your four knobs there, put all your nuts on. Just another point to note, don't start tightening everything down tight until you've got all the nuts on, because you might find that if you tighten one side up, this might not go on, whatever it may be. But just, that's good practice anyway, is to not tighten everything up tight until all your fastenings are in place. Now all 8 nuts are tightened, finger tight on the studs. I'm going to go ahead and use the ratchet to tighten them all up, and I'm basically going to work on opposites from the center. So I'm going to say start with this one, I'm going to tighten up this one, and just working out so they're all kind of evenly tightened up, torqued down, so you won't get any twisting. So I'm going to now tighten up all the fastening points, remove the nuts here, put the seat base back on, and tighten up those bolts, nuts. Seats now on our Rusty Lee swivel base. It looks really, really good from here. The last thing we've got to do is put our nuts on, tighten them all down in the same sort of order, you know, starting from the center, working out. And then I'll put the rest of the cab back together, driver's seat in, handbrake on, and then we'll show you how to turn it around. And there we have it. It's in and fitted and it looks awesome. I love it. So now, let's show you how to turn it. First step is to undo the 4 dials. Stage 2 is to move the seat forward. Stage 3, turn the seat anti-clockwise whilst missing the dash and the door. Bring the seat forward. And step 4, do the front 2 dials back up so you don't get movement in your seat. And it's as easy as that. I am very, very, very happy with that as a piece of kit. As I told you at the beginning of the video, that is a crash tested seat base. It's also a TÜV tested, TÜV approved seat base. It screams quality. It's actually the easiest seat base I've used. It was very easy to turn. It actually glided round really, really nicely. Didn't catch on anything, and I didn't have to open the door to do it. So as of, if it was raining, for example, you wouldn't need to open the door, get the inside of the van wet to turn the seat round. All in, a rad product. If you want to buy that kit, have a look at coombervalleycampers.co.uk. I'll leave a link down below in the description. Go to our products page and you can buy one of those seat bases directly from us. Thank you very much.